Saludos. It's your host, Gabe Morales. Today we're going to cover the Colombian cartels. These organizations were mostly involved in moving cocaine during the 1970s and on. In their heyday, they moved a large amount of drugs into the United States, and while they're still active, they have increasingly worked with other organizations like Mexican drug cartels, as described in the Mexican Drug Trafficking Organizations series. The majority of drug trafficking in Colombia has focused on four main areas and cartels active within those areas. These were the Medellin cartels, the Cali cartels, the Del Norte Valle cartel, and the North Coast cartel, all which are no longer active, which has caused many smaller groups to become involved in cocaine trafficking activities. Cocaine has been very lucrative for many individuals, even though it has also been very dangerous, as there's a high likelihood that they will be killed by rivals or jailed by Colombian government authorities and possibly extradited to the United States to face trial and be incarcerated. Colombia has been the world's leading producer of coca for many years, and at $1,500 per kilo produced in jungle labs, a lot of money could be made, fetching as much as $50,000 per kilo in the United States. The United States is the world's largest consumer of cocaine and other illegal drugs for that matter. U.S. authorities did a pretty good job of cutting off the Colombian cocaine drug lords during the 1980s and 90s. But like I said, that just created more of a market for the Mexican drug cartels to sell their product. In the past, Colombia produced such drug barons as Pablo Escobar and the Ochoa brothers, Jorge, Juan, and Fabian, Carlos later, and Jose Rodriguez Gacha, who, when active, among the world's most powerful and wealthiest men. It is said that Escobar was the wealthiest criminal in history, having personally amassed an estimated $30 billion by the time of his death. That would be equivalent to $70 billion today. Pablo Escobar, in particular, produced a very ruthless organization by kidnapping and murdering those who opposed him. He was not even intimidated by government officials. The Medellin cartel was responsible for killing thousands of people, both government officials, politicians, law enforcement officers, military, journalists, and rivals. But just like Pancho Villa in Mexico, many people love Pablo Escobar, especially where he was from, as he provided a lot of jobs in the area and invested a lot of his profits into schools, roads, hospitals, etc. Pablo Escobar's Medellin cartel originally started off by buying coca leaves from Bolivia and Peru, and then processing it inside Colombia into powdered cocaine, which, once upon the streets of the United States, was often turned into crack cocaine that was sold by the Crips and Bloods and other street gangs in the United States. Carlos Enrique Leader Rivas is a former drug lord who was a co-founder of the Medellin cartel under Pablo Escobar. Leader was very wild and high profile and admired the Nazis. His mother was Colombian and his father was German, and he idolized Hitler. Born in Armenia, Colombia, Leader eventually ran a cocaine transport empire via Colombia to Norman's Cay Island, located off the Florida coast in the central Bahamas, which was a perfect refueling spot for his airplanes that then flew on to the U.S., flying very close to the ocean water so they'd be able to beat the Coast Guard's radar. Later was also one of the founding members of Muerte a Secuestradores, or MAS, a paramilitary group whose focus was to retaliate against radical leftist guerrillas kidnapping cartel members and their families. His motivation to create MAS was to retaliate against the M19 guerrilla movement, which in November 1981 attempted to kidnap Leader for ransom. But Leader managed to escape from the kidnappers, even though he was shot in the leg. Additionally, Leader founded a neo-Nazi political party, the National Latin Movement, whose main function was to force Colombia to cut off its extradition treaty with the United States. Eventually, Escobar gave him up to government authorities. Once Escobar gave him up and he was captured, he testified against Escobar and several other Colombian traffickers and was held in protective custody. So he would never be safe again in Colombia. Leader was released from the Bureau of Prisons in the year 2020, being 70 years old, after spending 33 years incarcerated. After he was extradited to Berlin, Germany, they declined to prosecute him on any past charges, and he appears to be living a life of luxury and relative safety, and is still alive, as opposed to Escobar. Escobar was able to monopolize the cocaine trade into the United States in the 1980s through the early 1990s by working with individuals like Carlos Lader and George John, who is fictionally depicted in the movie Blow, starring Johnny Depp. Escobar also worked with people like Griselda Blanco, who was featured on the Real Queens of the South video on this channel. Jose Gonzalo Rodriguez Garcia, also known as El Mexicano, due to his close ties to Mexican drug trafficking organizations, starting in the late 1970s, whereby he sold cocaine to the Mexican drug trafficking organizations. El Mexicano often used Panamanian and Nicaraguan clandestine airfields to move his shipments. The U.S. government was already cracking down on cocaine in Florida by the early 1980s, and Rodriguez Garcia was able to make a deal with Mexican drug traffickers to have them haul it through their territories and smuggle it across the border. At first, he paid them monetarily, but later on, he gave them cocaine in return for doing this. This was a good deal for the Mexicans as well as the Colombians. Rodriguez Gacha was the creator of Tranquilandia, which was a clandestine cocaine processing facility located deep in the jungles of Colombia, until it was shut down by the Colombian government with assistance from U.S. intelligence agencies in 1984. After Tranquilandia was destroyed, the Medellin cartel, on Pablo Escobar's order, killed the Colombian Minister of Justice, Rodrigo Lara Bonilla, who had been crusading hard against the cartel.
The building, even tanks and planes were used. On the first day, the soldiers conducted a siege, trying to smoke out the invaders with little blood. By the evening they managed to get into the building, but the partisans did not think to give up. Instead, they set fire to archives containing evidence against the cartel and continued fighting with soldiers. The troops managed to recapture the building only after noon the next day. During the fighting, about 100 people were killed, among whom were also members of the Constitutional Chamber and members of the Supreme Court. With this action, Pablo Escobar showed everyone that he would stop at nothing. In the storming of the Palace of Justice and Escobar's subsequent open confrontation with the government did not look like something that appeared out of nowhere. It did not happen that everything was quiet and peaceful, and then, for no reason at all, Pablo raided the main judicial body of the country. They fought with the authorities before him, and in parallel with him, and after him. Another conversation is that he had more money than any guerrilla group in Colombia, which means that the blow he could deliver was several orders of magnitude stronger. However, the echoes of these blows that Escobar carried on the authorities, and in particular the strongest at that time in the form of the seizure of the Palace of Justice, were also heard by his organization. Those shareholders of the Medellin cartel who refused to participate in the fight against extradition, after the case with the Palace of Justice, began to leave the cocaine business altogether, believing that this case was becoming too dangerous, and everything was not smooth at the top of the cartel.
This was a major blunder, as public opinion turned on Escobar and the Medellin cartel. In addition to Escobar, most of the cartel's other major figures and associates were either gunned down by the military and police forces or turned themselves in, as they were wanted and knew they were likely to be killed if they didn't surrender. And they often did this in exchange for more lenient prison terms. Eventually, there was pressure to shut down Pablo Escobar's cartel, and he was imprisoned on house arrest, but escaped and was caught later and killed.
His funeral was attended by more than 10,000 residents of Medellin.
The Cali cartel was an organization based in the southern part of Colombia, in and around Cali, Colombia, and the Valle de Cauca. Its founders were Gilberto and Miguel Rodriguez Orjuela and Jose Santa Cruz Londoño, formed about 1975. They were initially primarily involved in marijuana trafficking. In the 1980s, they branched out into cocaine trafficking. For a time, the Cali cartel supplied 80% of the United States cocaine that was often ran through Jorge, and they supplied 90% of the European market. On November 15, 1984, Gilberto was captured in Spain, and the cartel started falling apart and basically ceased to exist by 1995. The Norte del Valle cartel, or Northern Valley Cartel, was a drug trafficking organization that operated primarily in the northern part of the Valle de Cauca in Colombia. It rose up during the mid-1990s after the fall of the Medellin and Cali cartels. The main chiefs of the Norte del Valle Cartel included Diego León Montoya Sanchez, Wilbur Varela, and Juan Carlos Rodriguez Abadia. Of the original leaders, Wilbur Varela was the last remaining member being sought by authorities until he was found dead on January 31st, 2008. The Norte del Valle cartel is estimated to have moved more than 1.2 million pounds or 500 metric tons of cocaine worth over $10 billion from Colombia to Mexico and then into the United States. The cartel was believed to have used the services of the United Self-Defense Forces of Colombia, which was a right-wing paramilitary group classified as a terrorist organization, as they were responsible for many bombings. The Norte del Valle cartel operated until about the year 2012. The North Coast cartel was based in the Colombian city of Barranquilla, located by the Caribbean coast. It was headed by Alberto El Caracol, aka the Snail in English, Orlandes Gamboa. He was considered to be as ruthless as Pablo Escobar. As head of his organization, El Caracol depended on his close associates to conduct daily operations, and he insulated himself pretty much from the organization. But DEA intelligence indicates that independent drug traffickers in Colombia at the time had to pay taxes to Gamboa's organization in order to operate. His influence in the region was so strong that drug traffickers even asked him permission before they would assassinate their enemies. On June 6, 1998, El Caracol was arrested in Barranquilla as a result of a joint operation between the U.S. DEA and Colombian National Police. El Caracol then was flown to Bogota, the capital of Colombia, where he was held on multiple murder, kidnapping, and terrorism charges. He was then extradited to the United States in the year 2000 and pled guilty in 2003 to smuggling tens of thousands of kilos from Colombia into the United States. After this, his cartel basically ceased to exist. Until 2011, Colombia remained the world's greatest producer of cocaine products. But with the assistance of U.S. authorities, the Colombian government acted more aggressive in going after drug traffickers than most other countries in the world under the 1988 Vienna Convention against illicit traffic in narcotic drugs and psychotropic substances. Drug consumption in Colombia is relatively low today, but given the fact that the population of the United States is the world's largest consumer of illegal drugs, Colombia and surrounding countries are still major factors in the transportation of cocaine out of South America to U.S. markets. While the Colombian police and military have captured and extradited drug lords at a rate of over 100 per year in recent years, there continues to be a major supply and demand motivation to make large sums of money by drug trafficking. While some revolutionary leaders and anti-government groups made peace with the Colombian government over the last decade, others, both radical revolutionary movements and outright criminal organizations, continue to be involved in the movement of cocaine out of the region. The main criminal paramilitary organizations active today are said to be the Black Eagles, Los Rastrojos, Los Urobeños, Los Paisas, Los Machos, Los Haitanistas, Renacer, Nueva Generación, the Popular Revolutionary Anti-Terrorist Army of Colombia, Bloque Meta, Liberadores de Vichada, and El Ejército Popular de Liberación, as well as La Oficina de Envigado, which was a former militant wing associated with the Medellin cartel. In addition to Colombia, you have countries like Peru and Ecuador, which has criminal organizations that are buying and transporting cocaine through Ecuador, or the Oliver Sinistera Front, or FOS, which is a dissident faction of the now disbanded Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, or FARC. It is also said that the Cartel de Sinaloa and the Cartel de Jalisco Nueva Generación have a presence in the area. As stated in previous videos, these two major cartels have been responsible for the majority of violence in Mexico in recent years. In fact, in a major reversal from prior years, Mexicans on the ground in the area now are said to control the bulk of the regional cocaine trade. Today, Mexican cartels control everything from the harvesting of coca leaf to the sale of cocaine on a New York City street corner. They are more powerful for it than Pablo Escobar, said Colombia's president Gustavo Petro, then a senator, in a tweet he sent in August 2019. The 2021 arrest and extradition of Dairo Antonio Usuga, alias Antonio, head of the paramilitary Clan del Golfo cartel, may be the largest kingpin of his stature to be taken down in recent years. So, while the Colombian cartels are not as big of a factor as they once were, they are still part of the equation in America's war on drugs. I hope you enjoyed this episode and come back to view more. For now, this is Gabe Morales signing off for Gangsters, Cops, and Politicians.